So I often hear many people say that they don't know how to hear their true self, or they don't trust their intuition. But the true self is not silent, and it's constantly communicating with us. And our job is to learn how to listen to it. But what's usually happened is that we've learned to drown its voice out. And we usually drown its voice out through our conditioning, through our fears and our urgency, and the constant pressure to react and decide and fix things. And we sometimes do it by, asking ChatGPT for life advice instead of really seeing what our true self is saying. So listening to or hearing the true self is not about gaining something new. Really what it is about remembering and removing the interferences that get in the way. But our true self doesn't shout. It doesn't sort of speak loudly. It doesn't argue. It doesn't panic. It pulls gently. It sort of whispers. Like a river's current, it draws you towards its natural course, and not through force, but through subtle signs. So it could be a quiet sense of a yes or a no, or a feeling of expansion within or contraction. It could be an intuitive thought that feels simple or clean, or an emotional truth that comes without us feeling any drama. We don't have to often strain to hear it. In fact, the harder we try, the often we move further away from it. Because our intuition rarely sounds like, quick, panic. We must decide everything now in the next 7 seconds. That's the ego mind that does that. So the ego mind pulls loudly in the opposite direction. It pushes us towards control, towards managing our emotions or avoiding discomfort and maintaining the identity we think we are. And we can choose to follow the egoic mind. But what might happen if you do that is that the choice won't always align with the deeper truth of who we are. So in order to listen to our true self, we want to do something that sometimes Buddhist traditions call the backward step. So the backward step means stepping out of our automatic reactions and into awareness. And when we sit in this awareness, in that moment, we can pause, we can observe our thoughts and our conditioning, we can notice our emotions, and we can feel the impulses in our body that we want to do, but without immediately acting on them. But the ego mind usually wants us to do the forward step. It wants us to react right away, to explain, to defend, to do, fix. So basically, it just wants to do something immediately. Even if it's something that you're going to regret 5 minutes later, like maybe sending a message or an email. That's why they say, just hold it before you actually just reply. So when we live in the forward step, we become pretty mechanical. And what happens is that every situation triggers us, and the same conditioning and reactions happen over and over again. So maybe someone criticizes us and we defend, or someone disagrees with us and we argue. Something feels uncomfortable, so we avoid it. It's kind of like our nervous system has its very own enthusiastic autopilot, and it's always ready to take control. The problem with that, though, is that the autopilot usually has the mind of a child. And what the backward step does, it interrupts the autopilot. It notices it, watches it. It gives us space to notice what's happening inside before we react. And in that space, what we gain is choice. And that's really, really important. So instead of reacting from habit, we can reflect and decide what response actually feels true to us. What's our intuition saying to do in this scenario? But there could also be another extreme as well. So when we're just in the backward step, we're always observing, always analyzing, and always stepping back. And what we can do if we do that too much is we just watch life like a spectator. We're still not listening to our intuition. So instead of participating in life, so we analyze situations from every possible angle and we don't really decide what we want to do. We sort of do the pros and the cons and the second pros and cons list. And the more we do that, the more stuck we get. So at some point, the awareness has to move back into action as well. But overall, the goal of the backward step is to not withdraw from life. The goal is aligned action. So we want to have the awareness in the backward step, connecting to our intuition, then response. Not automatic reaction, but a conscious moving forward through our intuition and our intuitive feelings. And that's what aligned action is. It's action that emerges, that feels truthful, appropriate, and internally peaceful, even if the situation itself is difficult. So it doesn't come from pressure or panic. It comes from clarity about what genuinely feels right in that moment, what our true self is saying. So aligned action happens when we take the backward step, when we listen to our true self or listen for what our true self is saying, and then take the forward step that reflects that truth. And this means you don't bypass the emotions, but you also don't let them drive you blindly either. So emotions can send messages, but you don't have to give them the car keys. So you can let them be informational, not authoritative. So the true self doesn't ask you to disappear or avoid life. It really asks you to engage honestly and openly. But our intuition is often harder to hear in emotions. So when life is calm, intuition is easy to follow. So if we're driving or watching TV or making neutral choices, you don't overthink generally. You act naturally and according to our true self. But when we're emotionally charged, then our conditioning gets activated again. Because the fear wants protection, anger wants control, and shame wants hiding. And our attachment or fear of attachment wants reassurance. So these emotional strategies once helped us survive. But they were designed for ancient survival problems, not for replying to our emails. So they're not really always the voice of the true self. So to hear intuition when we feel emotions, we must really first recognize what are our habitual responses here. So what we can also ask then is, what am I feeling? And what do I usually do when I feel this way? How do I usually think when I feel this way? What am I trying to control or avoid? And what belief is driving this reaction? And again, this awareness creates space. So before intuition can guide action, something else must happen as well. And in that place of sitting back, that's acceptance. When you sit as the awareness of the true self and allow what's there, when you allow the emotion to exist, the impulse to act to arise, and the ego strategy to be seen without immediately obeying it, that's really what acceptance is. Not to the situation, but to the reality of what's going on within you and without. And only after acceptance does aligned action make it easier. But often we mistake our intuition for anxiety, impulse, desire, fear, doubts. But intuition often feels very different. So intuition often feels very calm, even when it's firm, or clear, not chaotic, simple, not dramatic. It's often grounded and not rushed. It's a sense usually of internal ease. It may not feel uncomfortable, but it feels true to us. So it usually sounds more like a quiet nudge than a motivational speaker yelling inside your head. And sometimes the intuitive action still involves doing something the ego wants, maybe setting a boundary, leaving a situation, or speaking up, but usually for a different reason. The difference is understanding which part of you is leading. So the true self or the ego. So when you practice meditation, it's a way to start learning to listen to your true self. So meditation is not about emptying your mind. Meditation can be about practicing the backward step. So when you sit and allow your attention to wander, you're learning to do things like notice thoughts without following them. Feel emotions without acting on them. Also observing the impulses without obeying them. And what this does, this builds the muscle of awareness. And while we build the muscle, that's great, but the real practice and the real use is bringing this into our daily life. So when we're triggered, we want to pause, notice, name what's happening, and ask what belief and emotion are driving the urge right now. And then listen deeper. Not what do I want right now, but what aligns with my deepest truth right now. So listening to our intuition often requires courage, because the true self doesn't always choose comfort. It chooses integrity and alignment. Now, it may ask you to say no when you're really used to saying yes. To stay when you really want to run, or to leave when you want to hold on, or maybe be honest when silence feels safer. But when you act in your alignment, something within us shifts. And what that usually is there usually becomes less inner conflict, less self-betrayal, and less regret. And even when outcomes are uncertain, we can feel calm in that. So I'd like you to close your eyes for a moment and take a slow breath. And as you do, just ask yourself, where in my life am I reacting instead of listening? What truth have I been sensing but avoiding? You don't need to answer these questions right away. The true self will respond in its own time, quietly, gently, and persistently. Your only job is to keep making space and to keep listening, to take the backward step, and when the moment is right, to take the aligned forward step. And that is how our intuition becomes our lived wisdom.